What's up, Justin? I'm gonna let a couple seconds go by to let the crowd come in. Wonder if there's a problem in the broadcast. We have low attendance, abnormally low attendance this morning. Gotta figure out what's up. Audio coming through. We've got a really good episode today. It's gonna be awesome. Yo, yeah, there's something wrong with my counter. Oh, there we go. There we go. Now we're back into reality. All right, team. Guess what? Guess what? This is the most amazing news. The sun came up this morning. It did. It did. It did. It did. And Bitcoin is running. All that's left to do is have a coffee, talk about what's new. Well, hopefully the audio problems and everything are solved. I figured out what it was with Chrome, weirdly, and no one tells you this or whatever it was. I was having trouble getting this camera to work with Chrome, but no one warns you. You have to completely start Chrome over, have the phone plugged in as a camera first, and then re-engage Chrome. If you don't do that, it won't work. Don't ask me why. No one warns you. No one tells you. I figured it out. So I think this should get rid of the audio problems. The audio problems, as far as I can understand, were Safari buffering, the actual browser. So anyway, I'm not going to bore you with stupid production details, but thanks for the patience. Thanks for waiting through a couple of iffy episodes as I got this studio set up and ready to go. So, but I'm not going to make you wait much longer for the fakest news of the day. The fakest news of the day is this. The Guardian dunking on Elon Musk this morning, dunking on him, right? Elon Musk broke the world record. He broke the world record for the largest fortune ever lost. They're saying it's something like $180 billion that he's lost since November 2021. Remember, these are the same folks who were so convinced that he was the stupidest businessman, buying Twitter was the dumbest idea in the world, he was never going to make money, so they get what they said, all this stuff, right? He's the biggest loser ever. But the funny thing is, right, of course, we all know that everything that's gone on since fiat was created means that people who understand wealth don't really count it in the way other people count it, right? So him losing $180 billion and it making news like this and people dunking on him as if he's an idiot, don't understand that losing $183 billion or whatever is of the loss he was contemplating, sitting there on an existential crisis about the end of all money, making money, civilization, all that kind of stuff. Because had he not bought Twitter, we would be in a very different situation now. And that's what today's episode is going to be all about. So we've heard of Elon's version of Occam's razor, right? I'm going to remind you of what Elon's version of Occam's razor is. Instead of Occam's razor being just that, the most likely excuse or the most likely explanation, the most probable explanation, the simplest explanation is usually the right one, right? So that's Occam's razor. Elon modified it for the parameters of the simulation, saying that, in fact, it's not the easiest, it's the most entertaining outcome that will produce the actual predictable result. So if you use that frame, the most entertaining outcome will be what the simulation tends towards. Boy, does today's news fit into that prediction. Every little bit about it. And here's what's going on. So RFK Jr., right? We know who RFK Jr. is. He is Robert Kennedy's oldest son. Robert Kennedy had a bunch of kids. He was JFK's brother and was the attorney general during the JFK administration, ran himself for the Democrat nomination, but he himself was also shot in the head and killed in California by a man named Sirhan Sirhan. And that was just a few years later, before the 1968 primaries. Now, we've talked a lot about the show LBJ, so Lyndon B. Johnson. Lyndon B. Johnson became the president after JFK was assassinated. And at the time, it was sort of treated as normal and what was going on. But nowadays, a lot of people bring up questions, and I'm going to get into that. So first of all, what is Kennedy doing? All right, so Kennedy launched a legal case yesterday against something called Trusted News Initiative, the Trusted News Initiative. And this is what he did, right? He sued the Trust Initiative on an antitrust basis, alleging the Trust Initiative is a classic group boycott, a concerted attempt by a group of competitors to disadvantage other competitors by cutting off access to a facility or market necessary to enable the boycotted firms to compete. While the Trusted News Initiative publicly purports to be a self-appointed truth police, extirpating online misinformation, in fact, it has suppressed wholly accurate and legitimate reporting in furtherance of economic self-interest of its members. So what it was really about was, what this legal case is really about is RFK suing the media companies about COVID disinformation, information, everything related to the vaccines, everything related to the lockdowns, everything related to math. The Trusted News Initiative, if you didn't know what it was, is this. It's a group formed by BBC, First Draft, Google, YouTube, Twitter, Reuters, Meta, Washington Post, all of the usual suspects got together, created this Trusted News Initiative to combat online misinformation of other things, and then it was completely redirected during COVID to be specific to COVID misinformation online. So RFK's lawsuit starts like this. Is this one of their old ones? Yeah, here it is. So the Trusted News Initiative now getting sued. Right? I thought I had a really good quote from his case, but I don't. So he's suing them, and lots of people talking about it online. He was on Tucker Carlson. Weirdly, we brought him up yesterday on the show, not knowing this case was coming, but here it is, right? So that's an interesting simulation glitch as far as I'm concerned, just for that. So RFK now suing the Trusted News Network. And when I mention Elon's version of Occam's razor, that reality will tend towards the most entertaining, here's what I'm seeing, right? Here's what I'm seeing. RFK, being the inheritor of the Kennedy legacy, he's the eldest son of RFK. Of course, JFK Jr. perished in a plane accident. Caroline Kennedy, the sister, I'm not sure if she's still alive, but I know she was like an ambassador. She's kind of with the administration. She's not really that useful for what kind of stuff RFK Jr. is up to, right? So here's the frame that I see. So on a few episodes ago, we discussed how maybe LBJ, we don't have any proof, but the frame I've been using for a long time is based on the Roger Stone argument. Roger Stone being the guy who was arrested during the Trump-Russia collusion case, where CNN was tipped off and actually had live cameras when the FBI went in and did the thing. So Roger Stone, he wrote a book, and it's something that I learned about years ago, arguing that LBJ was involved in the JFK assassination due to investigations by RFK and JFK into what LBJ had done as senator and as all of the other things. And the argument was, why would he even want to be vice president in the first place? LBJ had bullied his way into being the vice president. And just before the Texas assassination happened, RFK, as Attorney General under JFK, had opened up a file on his political corruptions. So we've discussed his political corruptions here before. He was someone who had only ever been a public servant. He had been a congressman and a senator. Many books written on his career. The Robert Cato series is like 5 books that document every part of his life. He laughed at and shrugged off his accusations of being corrupted. He died being worth over $100 million after only ever being a congressman and senator and president. He just said his wife ran really successful radio stations, and that's where he got all the money. Perhaps true, perhaps true. But nevertheless, it's argued by Roger Stone that he was the fella who did it. Now, what happens at the same time, right? We saw the other day, so LBJ takes over, right? So JFK gone, LBJ takes over. What happens next is a series of things that really lead us to the world we're in. First of all, and people have been talking about this for a while now, Robert Breedlove shared a video just the other day on JFK and the Federal Reserve. So there's an argument out there that JFK, just prior to being assassinated by Fiat, signed Executive Order 1110, or 4 ones and a 0. It was that the U.S. federal government could no longer go into debt reserve. Right? They couldn't run deficits anymore. That would be, and the US government couldn't borrow money basically by selling T-bills to the Federal Reserve in return for cash and bonds and all the other things that would allow them to go into debt. So that was said, JFK was saying no more of that, right? No more of that. So when JFK dies, LBJ takes over and launches the Just Society, which is a huge program spending where you start seeing a lot of the arguments around, well, this is good for people. We're on the moral high ground. We can do this. This is for ending poverty. This is for ending all the afflictions. All we need to do is put it in the budget and pay for it. That's where you get NPR. That's where you get all kinds of social programs that were, packaged and sold as a way to eradicate differences in society. But sitting here 60 years later, we realized that all the injustices that LBJ, was saying that his money printing was going to end are all still around us. Nothing from that era has really been solved. And, when we think of the fourth turning frame, right, the fourth turning frame, which we've talked about a lot on the show, fourth turning written by a couple of academics back in the 1990s, really a great predictive frame. And what it says is that there are no history is not a linear path, that it's kind of seasonal, and it follows the seasons of generations living on Earth. And we went through a golden age, and he argues that the golden age, that the whole 80-year turning season history cycle we're talking about now, the golden age, the first period, ended with JFK's assassination. And from there, we enter this awakening period. And that's where LBJ starts to set the course for America and for the modern world. And that's where you start getting all the stuff we're learning about today. Exactly what RFK is suing them over, which is the media coordination with government in order to push propaganda. And a lot of this began in that era, in an era where we see right away the Federal Reserve, 1971, just after, ends the gold standard. So we have a totally different financial metric system that comes right after. Coincidentally, the Biden family, Biden himself, becomes a senator just after. So as the LBJ administration was setting the course for America, not long after, although he was no longer president, LBJ had already left office, Biden was elected in 73, so into a very different climate. This is where you get a lot of mainstream media that now is starting to coordinate with government agencies. This is where the Church Committee originally happened. It happened in this era to find out what the heck was going on here, to find out how much coordination and collusion was going on between government agencies and media outlets, in particular, national security apparatus, national intelligence community, those kinds of things. And that's something that no one really learned or studied or thought about much over the last 60 years, but it's coming up to the forefront, bubbling up right now again with folks like Glenn Greenwald talking about it, referring to it really often. And the new committee that was started, the WTF committee that we did yesterday's show on, focused on figuring out the same dynamics that they were studied back during the Church Committee in the 1970s. So we'll see what happens there. But RFK Jr.'s legal case here directly related to that kind of influence. He's taken aim directly at the media companies for collusion. So it's another way to talk about the same subjects, right? So another way to talk about the same subject. Of course, that's where we got into the oil crisis as well, and the creation of the petrodollar. So that's where gold leaves the system, and we start having an anchoring in an energy system because of its implications for national security and other things, which was oil, right? So all of this sort of begins then, right, with Biden as a senator and LBJ and that administration still sort of running the country, right? So if we think in terms of simulation, right, let's go back. We've got the Federal Reserve starting at the same time, and Kennedy definitely moving against it. And then that's taken away. LBJ comes in, puts the moral high ground argument onto everything. and then justifies the printer going into its burr mode, its original burr Fiat mode. 1 second. Kids, toys, rooms locked, normal sort of stuff in the house. So, what with the LBJ, with the RFK case, with the WTF committee, with all of this conversation now around the coordination between government and health agencies and the media and all these other entities, we get all kinds of where's this one? We get all kinds of takes, right? Everyone having a take. So Caitlin Johnstone, who we mentioned the other day about, we shared a long Twitter thread of hers around the Matrix and what it means to open your eyes. Really great read. But here I'm going to disagree with her take. But it's still a valid one. I'm just going to disagree and add a little more subtlety to it. So she's talking right now about these folks that RFK Jr. is suing and everyone else who's touting government talking points as media entities. And she says, Western journalists are cowardly, approval-seeking losers. The Western media class is a cloistered, incestuous circle jerk that only cares about impressing other members of the cloistered, incestuous circle jerk. Western journalists the Pulitzers are mostly just a bunch of empire propagandists giving each other trophies for being good at empire propaganda. So that's, I only disagree with her a little bit. The cowardice part, maybe. It's not really that, right? Here's another take from Brendan Dilley, right? Brendan Dilley. He says, from 2016 to 2022, we were referred to what big tech was doing as censorship, election interference, political bias. Today, I think it's time to acknowledge what big tech, our government, and our foreign agents were actually doing: social engineering. They want to make more docile, manageable. They want you to not trust one another. More importantly, your own discernment. Slowly, they've tried to alter the way you speak, think, make decisions, and feel about you and the world around you, right? So I'm going to take a different, I'm going to oppose both of their points of views subtly. When she says it's cowardice, Caitlin Johnstone says they're cowards. And when he says they're aiming at social engineering, I'm going to back it up one little bit. The social engineering is already there. It's already been engineered. And it was from the money to begin with, right? If you go back to this period and we see the whole institution of this moral high ground argument of just society, that's what he called it, the just society, right? It was every time he talked about increasing the budget back then, and he ran a campaign on it, we're going to spend so much money, we're going to fix all our problems, we're going to be the just society. That's where you end up having the flippening of political parties. That's where you get Democrats who go into that field because of the moral high ground argument. That's where all of those arguments towards helping everyone, and you're a good person if you're like this, and you have to vote this way because if you're the other way, you're not sympathetic. But remember what happens at the same time, like a magician, right? You show people what's going on in this hand, but the other hand is the one doing the actual magic trick. So what is LBJ actually doing, right? He's starting the Vietnam War, right? That wasn't JFK. If JFK wasn't assassinated, Vietnam is likely a footnote in our history. The Gulf of Tonkin and the false flag event that happened to kick off the war was done under LBJ's guidance. He was president when that stuff happened. So you get LBJ already on that trajectory. We just talked about the Federal Reserve, right? The Federal Reserve. From that point, we had JFK, who was limiting the government from going into debt, right? Saying, no, you're not going to be able to go into the debt to the Federal Reserve. Also regularly talking about fat American kids. Now, we don't fat shame ever on this show. We have nothing but sympathy for folks who have trouble controlling those impulses and urges. It's a very difficult world that we live in when it comes to that stuff. Anyone who tells you to eat balanced diet has not taken a walk through a regular grocery store these days, because there's nothing like a balanced diet in a grocery store, right? It's just completely one-sided in terms of carbohydrates and everything else that's there, right? There's no opportunity for a balanced diet. If you don't have it genetically, you're up against a pretty steep curve as far as I can tell, right? So it's as someone who does, I think, have predisposition to be able to handle this stuff and the capacity to manage my diet and the discipline and all of those kinds of things, and just to eat healthy. And I've never dieted in my life, but I try to eat healthy. But I wasn't always that way, and I, pretty much look similarly. So I won't fat shame because of those things, but that doesn't mean we go out and say it's healthy and all the rest of it, right? I have empathy for the situation, so it's not an excuse, and it's not um, I'm not saying go ahead and be like that and don't change. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying it's not easy for everyone, and we're not here to fat shame. But all that said, Kennedy regularly, while he was president, talked about American kids getting too obese already in the 1960s. In the 1960s, he was saying that, right? So when we're talking about what this journalist said, that it's social engineering what's being done, it's social engineered. I'm just going to change the tense. It already happened. So the journalists aren't so much cowards. They've been socially engineered. It's been 60 years of the same script. It's very difficult to peel back 60 years of brainwashing. That's 3 generations, right? 3 generations, you start to forget what it was like. 5, I think, is the limit. I think after 5, you've done a whole turning and you can't even remember. There's no one even around from a previous era. So 5 generations is kind of a magic number. That's what North Korea is dealing with. China is dealing with that, right? That's a lot different than what we're dealing with in America. But nevertheless, 3 generations are enough to keep you pretty disconnected from what happened before. But Kennedy was talking about this stuff back then. He was saying these exact words back then. And of course, we remember that not long after, he was also saying that LBJ wouldn't be a running mate. And that's where LBJ invited him to Texas, and he went to Texas, LBJ's home, and it wasn't a great trip. He didn't have a great time in Texas, right? I've heard that joke. Other than the car ride, Mrs. Kennedy, how was Texas? It's not great. So the social engineering part, right? It's not really that they're cowardly. I don't want to. I mean, there are definitely a lot of cowards in mainstream media, no doubt. We've seen Jimmy Fallon get pointed out as a major coward just the past couple of days because he did another one of these song and dances about the COVID XBB.1.5 that some people are talking about. And when we think of these, and I guess yesterday, the United States actually extended the public health emergency mandate. Alex Berenson, who, we don't always trust his points of view, but we love that he comes out and said he's not one of the cowards, right? That's enough in the environment we're in. Alex Berenson yesterday saying, just a reminder, the public health emergency, he puts in quotes, is all about maximum liability protection for the mRNA vaccine companies. There is no medical or public health justification. And at this point, it's so backward-assed, it actually hurts Uncle Joe politically, is what he's arguing. And I would agree. So yesterday you had Jimmy Fallon, or 2 days ago on his night show, making a song and dance about the COVID thing. And it literally, the only reaction was how unfunny it was and how cringy it was. And it made everyone on what Glenn Greenwald has been talking about related again to this, right? That began in this time to catalog what the CIA was up to. And Jimmy Fallon, of course, with NBC. And NBC is one of the entities that Glenn Greenwald and the church community insisted was an arm of the government, in a sense, of national security interests, and was a regularly used outlet for talking points to be slipped in and pushed to people. So when you see a fellow like Jimmy Fallon singing this XB.1.1.5 song, everyone reacting, how is this even possible? Who's paying him? Where do the talking points come from? Because it's not humor. It's not like a comedian would have found that funny and gone and done a bit on it. It looked like there was some coercion. Now, you get also other people talking about how the Bidens continue to push Facebook and other entities in order to censor folks. Yesterday, there was an article written in the Wall Street Journal by someone named Janine Jones, who was pushing back against the White House trying to defend themselves against accusations that they are leveraging big tech, themselves saying it's actually big tech doing it, right? It's not, we need to control big tech more. It's their fault that there is even misinformation. They've mismanaged the whole thing, and therefore we need to regulate them. The government looking bad in the case of the Twitter files and COVID misinformation stuff, in their mind, really just because the social media companies didn't do the job correctly, right? Instead of acknowledging and discussing or even giving a response to accusations that they were infringing on people's First Amendment rights. And then you can see the corruption. So it's not even cowardice, right? We can see the corruption in framing with a meeting that happened yesterday. We had the Biden officials who went down to Mexico City, talking with the folks in Mexico City. They came out, and the journalists, were satisfied, right? Satisfied with the following answer. They talked about a bunch of stuff. Did they talk about border security? Did they talk about anything related to migration, right? Both cabinet officials said, oh, we ran out of time. And the news was like, oh, okay, fine, no big deal. Right? So what could be a priority really just was shrugged to the side. So when I say that the social engineering already passed, that it's been socially engineered, Brett Weinstein had, I think, one of the best takes on it that I could come up with, or that anyone can come up with, and it's the following. Everyone talking about conspiracy theories these days and the changing nature of that word, right? It's becoming more and more of a virtue to be a conspiracy theorist, whereas maybe a couple of years ago, it was still used to dismiss someone's opinions. Oh, they're a conspiracy theorist, right? So that word really in flux, shifting right now as we move into another era. We've talked about the history of the word conspiracy theory. It came from this period. It came from that period. We talked once about how the New York Times never even referred to the words conspiracy theory before 1964. From 1964 on, hundreds of times. Immediately in 1964, 5 times. And after that, almost every article, more or less. And again, it all refers back to this one little period in time when seemingly everything changed, right? Everything almost changed overnight. So Brett Weinstein saying here, as conspiracy theories go, the idea that our governments are motivated by an obsession with our safety is seriously bottom of the barrel. And that's what it all comes down to, right? The conspiracy theory in the end is that government would want you better off somehow, right? That that's what they're motivated by. Their incentives are your health, your safety, your security. They might outwardly say they want that, but that's never really the case, right? That's never really the case. The corruption enters the system right there, right? The corruption enters the system right there. So it's not really anymore about your health, your benefits. What's it about? There's a million reasons. We can talk about them right now. Here's one when it comes to, this is something lots of folks were talking about yesterday, the usefulness of academia and academic studies, right? So, theoretically, academia should have protected some of this information, should have protected us, should have been a middle ground that wasn't incentivized by clicks, wasn't incentivized by any of the other things that would corrupt the system. But what ended up happening? Well, it turns out 82% of articles in the humanities are, and these are the published ones, these are not PhDs, these are folks who already have their PhD and are going after these prestigious publications, right? So 82% of these things never read, right? Of the articles that are cited, right? So, pardon me, 82% never cited. Of the ones that are cited, 20% have actually been read, like beginning to end, right? And half of academic papers are never read by anyone, right? So lots of people talking about this yesterday. We had even Saifedean jumping into the argument and sharing from the Fiat standard to explain this. He says, in a free market for science, free market of intervention of Fiat, research is intimately tied to the needs of the market, and any misdirection of resources results in a loss for the investor, either forcing him to learn his lesson or even eventually bankrupting him. Either way, what is wasteful will cease. But with a Fiat standard, the waste can continue for as long as the government's currency can be devalued. Government scientific and research bodies are central planning boards able to decree by their fiat what is legitimate science, what researchers get funded, which scholars get to call themselves scholars, and which get banished as heretics. Like central planners in socialist economies, as Mises explained, these bureaucrats are unable to perform a rational economic calculation with their resources. As they do not own the resources they allocate and cannot estimate the correct opportunity costs for their different uses. There is no real feedback from the market to the decision makers in the form of profits for productive applications of capital and losses for wasteful applications. Without the feedback mechanism of profit and loss, any bureaucracy is deaf, dumb, and blind. Whereas in the production of agricultural commodities, and he goes on to explain what's going on, without a real market test of research decisions, the bureaucrats must assess contributions using imperfect metrics. Free from the test of market, researchers must focus on the metrics themselves, and eventually only the best at achieving these metrics succeeds. The goal is to get published, not to arrive at important conclusions. Scholars want to publish as much as possible to get more funding. And in the end, that's really what it comes down to. The explanation that people have for this failure is just money, right? The main reason is money. The professors want to get tenure. They want it now. And the only way to get it, the only way to get money, and it's not a lot of money, right? I've talked about a few times here that buying off a doctor or an academic is really cheap. It's much cheaper than a politician. A politician, you got to run their campaign. You got to keep giving them money. They're hard to get out of the job. They get hard to get into the job. It might not even return on the investment. So what ends up happening is you can get a doctor or an academic for under $100K a year, and they'll say whatever you want. We've mentioned many times the OxyContin case. OxyContin being one of the highest penalties ever handed out to a pharmaceutical company, and pretty much all of them got it. Walmart, even for selling the OxyContin, got it. And what they proved in order to get this in order to get this huge settlement, was that the pharmaceutical companies invented a category, breakthrough pain. They just invented a word, and then paid doctors to call this thing real. Breakthrough pain was just pain that lasted a long time. And a longer lasting pain was the trigger to up the dosage of OxyContin beyond what they had tested it at, because the whole scientific marvel of OxyContin was supposedly they had taken out the addictive qualities of the opiate. Because opioids, as we know, are super addictive, and that's the only drawback. They work perfectly for what they're intended for, except you get addicted to them. So they thought they had done the thing that everyone wanted to do: engineer out the addictive qualities, have a medical use for morphine, basically, that wasn't limited by the costs, which are the risk of addiction. So they thought they had done that, but then they realized, shit, man, you don't make as much money when people aren't addicted. You got to get people addicted. So what happened was, and this is not me saying this is what I think happened, what some folks on the internet told me. This is an actual legal case in America with billions of dollars attached to it, and some penalties have even been paid. So it's as real as it gets. And what this legal case proved, and what some of these rewards are proving, is that they did this. They paid doctors to call something a problem, breakthrough pain, 12-hour plus pain, and then they got a new formulation for the pills, which we found out later takes engineered out addictive quality. So they made it addictive again. They could have been morphine, right? But instead they thought they had, and now what we have in America is just devastating opioid addictions across the board. So that's where that has brought us, right? And now even think about that, right? Yesterday, so all of this stuff happening yesterday on academia, academic records, how useless they are. The simulation winked again to us yesterday. Aaron Schwartz killed himself, right? This was a researcher who tried to get academic research out into the market for free because no one was reading it. So he was one of the first Reddit folks. I mean, this is one of the most amazing people that ever lived. I had a bit of a rundown of his career here. I'm not sure I saved it. And in any event, Aaron Schwartz had done more by the time he was 20 than anyone I know, not even close, right? This is one of the smartest people that ever lived. And he was trying to build software in the 2010s and a little bit after that would allow scientific research to get beyond the paywall. 98% of scientific research was behind the paywall by this time. And he believed that public records and all that stuff should be free. So he created the Open Access Manifesto and did his best to try and get what he thought was useful information out to the market. Well, in the end, the Department of Justice and all these other people decided he was a criminal and started putting pressure on him, and he killed himself. Right. So this is someone who I know people who have known him, who knew him. I never knew him personally, but who's someone who everyone tells me is one of the greatest, sweetest, nicest, most thoughtful people you've ever encountered in your life. Talented, like you couldn't believe. Definitely would have been a Bitcoiner. Would have probably been talking with us all these years, doing fun open source stuff. But he never got to see it. And what was his crime? What was his crime? His crime was this stuff, getting research out where it should be, not behind paywalls, not being read, not part of a zero feedback loop system where we can't even tell if it's useful or not because nobody gives a shit. And he's dead, right? So that's another one of these simulation things yesterday that, have me going well. And we talked about Jimmy Fallon and NBC and being a spook, maybe, and government national security propaganda. People still talking about the Peter Zeihan interview the other day. And one of the interesting things about the Peter Zeihan interview that I know everyone talking about it. Now, I have no proof of this, right? NBC, I have the proof. Church Committee, Glenn Greenwald, lots of people talking about it. Jimmy Fallon, I don't have explicit proof, but part of the edifice, right? So Peter Zeihan, no proof, but lots of people now saying similar, right? Similar. And that's where, if you've noticed, there's this quality of Peter Zeihan where he speaks with tremendous authority about every subject. And so some people trying to mind read him. So we're in the field of mind reading right now, okay? So beware. Sort of in the field of mind reading. So what I'm about to say is not, I don't believe it passionately. So just remember that. People saying that maybe world and he did say, yeah, Justin says directly that he is working with the Department of Defense. Yes, he did say that in an interview. So I want to make that, I'm not exactly mind reading then, I guess you could say, right? So, but it's besides the point for what I want to mention. What I want to mention is this, he speaks confidently about things, about every subject. Where does the confidence come from? So the mind reading part is perhaps that he's reading talking points and there's things that you can say and things that you can't say and all those things. I'm reminded of the Murray Gell-Mann amnesia effect, right? So Murray Gell-Mann amnesia effect, if you don't know what it is, it's a effect invented by Michael Crichton, who I talk about regularly on this show. Wish he was still alive. Like Aaron Schwartz, would have been one of the great Bitcoiners had he made it. He was a Bitcoiner before Bitcoin was invented. He is the writer of Jurassic Park, the creator of ER, many other incredible stories. And he's really good at finding confident psychopaths. Yeah, they are. And the Murray Gell-Mann amnesia effect is basically this. And he named it after Gell-Mann, who was a physicist who won the Nobel Prize, Murray Gell-Mann. And Gell-Mann was telling him one day, I read this thing in the news and it was so stupid. It was about my field. They were idiots. Couldn't believe they thought something about physics that was that dumb. And then he turned the page and read another article and then spoke with Michael Crichton about it as if it was a real article about global politics or whatever. And Michael Crichton stopped him and said, whoa, buddy, the thing you're reading, I know about. It's as dumb as the article you just read about physics, your field. They're all dumb. As long as you have a certain level of intelligence or a certain level of awareness, you'll understand that every journalist writing in this is not that much of an expert in this field and are just performing the job of journalism. And therefore, you should discount actual comments, conclusions, if you're of a certain level of understanding of the subject. And he says you should do that about every article. It never ends. It's all the articles, right? It's all the articles. And you can apply that to Zeihan and Bitcoin, but the one everyone's got him on now. So confident about China, confident about a few things, but the one people have him on now is on nuclear energy. And so here's Decouple Media saying, there are so many layers of how Peter Zeihan manages to be wrong in such a short clip that we are in awe. The issue is, until we solve the fuel containment issue on the back end, once it's spent, this is already crap, he says, but he keeps going. So first of all, we've known about nuclear waste storage for a long time about how to do it, what are the right security protocols, how to manage it. The conclusion now is for the Gen 3, Gen 4 is just dig deep down underneath the actual reactor and never move the stuff ever. Just leave it in the containment that's there or somewhere around in the same location, so you're not even actually transporting it. One of the best ways. Chris Kiefer is saying here, watching Peter Zeihan opine on nuclear is so cringe. A brilliant man with very interesting takes based on an encyclopedic grasp of geography and demographics, but his credibility is injured by an air of supreme confidence when discussing an area he so clearly doesn't understand. And right, that's where I think most people are at when they're thinking of Peter Zeihan now, that this is a guy who on Bitcoin and on nuclear energy has embarrassed himself. I mean, you can't, the Murray Gell-Mann effect triggers immediately. How seriously can we take him on other subjects when he's as confident in subjects he doesn't know about as he is in them? So while I will continue to use some of Zeihan's frames, I'm definitely going to be more skeptical of him now, especially about the China stuff, right? So I often, especially about everything he says about China now, I think is suspect. That's how I'm going to approach it. I never used to. I used to think, well, maybe on this file, but Murray Gell-Mann, anyone can be afflicted by Murray Gell-Mann. So now let's go back to all of the stuff that comes with the new church committee and what's going on, and how information can be cleaned up from academia, from news. It's going to be a hard road. Right, Glenn Greenwald pointing out that every fighting against this new church committee, the WTF committee, they've changed the talking points. Right? They've changed the talking points. And here's Hakeem Jeffries saying, extreme MAGA Republicans have established a select committee on insurrection protection. We will fight it tooth and nail. So again, it's going to be a bunch of that. And Glenn Greenwald points it out. The Dems sound exactly like Dick Cheney these days. They're vehemently insisting there must be no scrutiny or transparency into the FBI, CIA, or Department of Homeland Security, because doing so is attacking our government and harming national security. This is the DNC neocon CIA union, right? That's what he's saying. In less than 12 hours, Democrats unanimously tried to block an investigation into the abuses of power by CIA, FBI, and DHS. They are key institutional allies. And without a single hearing happening, have convinced millions of their sheep that this is about empowering insurrection. So, and a bunch of articles written over time about how, and he brings the receipts again, Glenn Greenwald saying like, look, this has been going on for years. Just back in 2010, we would still talk about it, right? We would say that trying to shield people from investigations. Right, top secret world of government created in response to the terrorist attacks on 9/11 has become so large and then so unwieldy and so secretive that no one knows how much money it costs, how many people it employs, how many programs exist within it, or exactly how many agencies do the same work. And there are some of the findings of a 2-year investigation by the Washington Post that discovered what amounts to an alternative geography of the United States, a top secret America hidden from public view and lacking in thorough oversight. And again, no one really knows what these agencies do, right? No one has any clue, right? And you even get Reuters now, right, who's jumped in on this, saying that the 20 folks who pushed to have this committee in the first place themselves are all small donations backed folks, and they try to write this in a way that makes them look bad, right? They say their fundraising has a lot in common with their funding has a lot in common with far left lawmakers who just want, what do they say here? The U.S. House of Representatives. The folks who push for this far-right political views are commanded by powerful fundraising machines with small dollar donations, and that basically this insinuating that it's insidious, right? That having so many small back donors versus the larger ones somehow creates imbalance in the system and has to be managed and dealt with, right? So let's go back to the actual case, right? RFK suing the media companies, right? So RFK suing the media companies. Put it in the fourth turning frame, and what do you get, right? You get what I think is the simulation saying that RFK is going to fight the Bidens, right? RFK fighting the Bidens in court, in a way, right? So he's fighting executive branch manipulation of mainstream media. And if he gets his way, I think we're going to be able to unravel the whole case right back to when this stuff began, when his uncle and father were killed. Because the church committee was directly related to what was going on with his dad and the assassinations and perhaps the Federal Reserve, right? So in one legal case here, there's a chance, RFK Jr. versus the Bidens, for that to be more or less a proxy for LBJ and JFK. There's a chance that that happens, right? Because from the moment this first turning happened, from Golden Age to the Awakening, I think you can isolate it to that event, right? We've got the actual book that isolates it to the death of JFK. They say that's the moment that the Golden Age ended and we entered a turning and society moved on. But it's from that actual moment where the money, the oil, and the national security apparatus become coordinated and fog of war descends on America and on what we understand about it and what we're doing in the world. You know, from then on, you get the obesity, you get basically not social engineering. We were socially engineered then. It was already too late. From then on, the money is printing, the oil is flowing, and the propaganda is just puking. From then on, it doesn't stop. And there's a reason why the Federal Reserve and America's ability to go into debt is tracked back to there. There's a reason why national security apparatus and media start to show signs of collusion then, right? And from then on, it continues. So here we are and what is the simulation drawn up, right? The Biden family, who a lot like, if you're looking at the Hunter Biden stuff, right? What's going on with the Hunter Biden stuff? Well, it looks like he's going to get charged for obstruction of justice, a tiny little thing, just a tiny little thing. It's literally nothing, right? So probably not going to get much in the way of criminal, and the New York Times is reporting this. So this is a leak of what's going on, saying that he's only going to get charged with obstruction of justice, that it's going to be this kind of pressure valve with limited investigations, nothing into the dad, nothing into overall corruption. None of that is going to come up. And you have, it's Jonathan Turley who's actually breaking this news for me anyway, because I do not follow the New York Times other than for the laughs, right? Other than for the laughs. But he's got the articles right here. I'll tell you what he says. Yeah, so here he says, the New York Times is reporting that prosecutors are moving to charge Hunter on relatively modest charges. The focus will not be on influence peddling. That's what would have been trouble. I discussed, for the Washington establishment, it would be a brilliant controlled demolition of the scandal. The cottage industry of influence peddling would again be insulated from serious view. The timing is interesting as pressure builds. The hope. Anyway, it goes on to say that this would be just the controlled demolition would be great. This is the way to do it, and it won't really make that much of a difference. But what ends up happening is if the January 6th, sorry, what the fuck, the WTF committee looks into this stuff, they can actually open up new avenues for the New York Post suppression, and probably because there's no criminal charges, right? So other than the obstruction of justice, but not influence peddling, there's actually an interesting opening if that happens for the political committees. They can subpoena folks and give them immunity. They're already not getting charged. So if they're getting charged, they would have a much more trouble subpoenaing them into the Congress, because the criminal liability of what they're going to say and all that stuff, and just making sure they don't tip their hand for a criminal case would have a form of like supremacy or priority over what Congress is doing, right? Congress subpoenas aren't as powerful as justice system subpoenas, by the way, right? So they're not in the same realm of subpoena. But now you can actually start seeing some interesting subpoenas from Congress, which would be pretty cool. We'll see. We'll see. But that's where it's at, right? We get who is got this legal case now against the Biden. If there is any family who is the direct heir to the LBJ, it's looking more and more like it is the Bidens. This is a similar pivot in time. And this case could actually be a proxy for that case, which would be a beautiful and fitting end to this whole 80-year cycle, right? This whole 80-year cycle ending with JFK and truth on that story, truth on what happened with the Federal Reserve, truth on what happened with the national security apparatus, and all the unintended consequences, the obesity, which was predicted by JFK and warned about by JFK. All of those subjects, right, would come really into view and would help us bridge to the golden age of Bitcoin, which is on the horizon now. It's on the horizon, right? This could sew this whole era up perfectly, and we can just move on to something better once we get this all established. So I'm really happy about RFK Jr.'s legal case. I have some hope in it. I do. Even if he wins, we're going to have a discussion about stuff. So there you go. Justin, completely right. His book, Accidental Superpower, was profoundly insightful. Everything else I've heard from him has lowered my opinion of him. Yeah, I'm on that boat too, Justin. I am. P-Man Van, it makes you wonder if all his tales were wrong. It does. It does. I mean, again, Bitcoin, one of the great flatteners, right? Like you come up to Bitcoin and you give this bullshit explanation, and look, it's going to open a lot of people's eyes, right? As a lot of people say, your opinion on Bitcoin is really an indication of your worldview. I mean, almost, right? They're related, at least for Bitcoiners. Maybe we're blind. Maybe we're blind. I don't think so. Maybe we always have to be humble and wonder, right? We have to ask the questions. Confidence can quickly morph into arrogance. Hubris is a hell of a drug. Yep. Yeah, and Daniel says, up is down and black is white. Indeed, indeed. All right, team, that's what I got for today. Let me know if I'm missing anything. Let me know. All right, team. Peace. See you tomorrow.